we go. So thank you very much, everyone, and welcome to the second day of our Meet the Regulators sessions for the West Midlands. I'm Stuart Bruff from OPSS Local Delivery Team, and I'm pleased to welcome Niall McMenamin from Worcestershire Regulatory Services Licensing Department, who's going to tell us all about being licensing. So thank you very much, Niall, and over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Niall McMenamin. I'm one of the principal officers with Worcestershire Regulatory Services. I've been in licensing for approximately 22 years, joined in 2000 over in Solihull, moved across to Malvern in 2008 and came together in Worcestershire as the shared service in 2010. It's interesting, shared services presents its own challenges. So my intention today is to give you an overview of what licensing does and what licensing officers come across on their daily workload. So if we move on to the slideshow, Stuart. Then we move on. So by way of introduction, Worcestershire Regulatory Services, it's a shared licensing and environmental health service. As I mentioned, it came together in 2010, and we are responsible for administering and regulating the licensing service of a wide range of activities, and I'll go through some of them and give you an overview of what some of them involve as part of this presentation. But it's on behalf of all 6 district councils within Worcestershire. Coming together provided its own challenges, obviously. 6 different ways of doing things, all trying to be administered by one team. We have a team of approximately 16, including myself and another principal officer, overseeing the whole of the county. So although we are not a county function, we operate on a county-wide basis and then administer licensing for the 6 district councils. So if we move on to the next slide. These are the areas of licensing covered by WRS. Very similar to many licensing authorities who will also cover a whole wide range of licensing activities. You'll see there's quite a varied array of licensing activities ranging from alcohol, taxis, gambling, street trading, animal licensing being the main ones that create the majority of the applications that come through our door, dangerous wild animals, zoos, charitable collections, street trading, skin piercing, the whole lot is there for you to see. If we move on. So what is it that WRS licensing officers do? Well, ultimately we issue licenses. That's our job on behalf of the district councils. Our role is to process applications for the various types of licenses, permits and registrations that land in the inbox. We are there to issue licenses to enable businesses to trade and people to undertake certain functions. A lot of them are regulated by legislation and the law, so they need particular permits and licenses to be able to trade. We offer advice to businesses, members of the public. We also offer a paid advice service. So that can be business advice to enable businesses to trade well, or even start up. We offer advice to members of the public who are looking for information on licensing, whether they are affected by businesses which need licenses, or whether they are just interested in the work that we do. Our role is to ensure that businesses are compliant with relevant legislation and guidance, and our role really is to assist them. You know, we aim to help businesses work well. That is our ultimate goal. We will assist them in the licensing process as best we can to enable them to get their licenses and start their business and be successful. Another role is to investigate complaints. Obviously, lots of businesses generate complaints from members of the public and other people, councillors, other businesses, other organisations, and our role is to look into those complaints and investigate them. And then ultimately enforcement. Our role as licensing officers is to enforce against the legislation. If businesses are not complying with the legislation or they're not willing to comply with certain areas of law or legislation, then our role is to undertake enforcement activities to cease that trading or illegal activity that's taking place. If we move on, Stuart. What I'm going to do is cover some of the areas, not all of them, otherwise we'll be here for much longer than half an hour. It's just some of the main areas that we tend to cover. What are the main bits that or the main bits of work that land in our in-trays? So hopefully I'll cover those and give you a bit of an insight. Alcohol and entertainment, late night refreshment. So this is the Licensing Act. This is one of the main bits of legislation that we enforce, and it came into play in 2005. Previously, all licensing was done at the alcohol licensing anyway, was done at the magistrates' courts, and then they introduced the Licensing Act as a single system to administer various types of licenses, and I'll go on to the different types of licenses in a second, but all sitting under one piece of legislation. So at that time, the government's aims were to reduce crime and disorder through the misuse of alcohol and reduce the burden of regulation on industry. So I think they've achieved it. That's my personal view. We've certainly seen a reduction in crime and disorder in relation to the misuse of alcohol. Well, we have personally. Premises understand their responsibilities. There is less underage drinking is a good example. The statistics show that it's declined over the years since the Act was brought into play. And certainly the regulation of burden on the industry, it is fairly straightforward to apply for a licence. It's an application form. Yes, there are other elements to it, but basically you fill in a form, you tick the relevant boxes, and then you apply for your licence and it's granted. If we could move on to the next slide. So what do we deal with under this type of legislation? It's premises licences. You'll hear this term all the time being used. Premises licence, this, premises licence for that. Club premises certificates, the old working men's clubs, British Legion clubs, all require authorisations. Temporary event notices, the one-off events that take place around your districts. They can be festivals. They can be extensions to licensing hours on licensed premises. And then we have the personal licenses, individuals who need licenses to be able to authorise the sale of alcohol. You'll hear the term licensable activities, and these are broken down into three headings. So our licensing officers basically look at these licensable activities, and this is really what they are enforcing against. It's the sale by retail of alcohol, regulated entertainment, and late night refreshment. We move on. So what is the retail sale of alcohol? These are the types of premises that we license. Supermarkets, small supermarkets, big supermarkets. It's the sale of alcohol from these premises. So there's a picture of the wine racks and the array of wines from Waitrose at your top end to your other supermarkets at the lower end. Off licenses, your corner shops selling alcohol off the shelf to the local community. Bars and restaurants, and these can be modern bars or they can be theme bars, they can be nightclubs, all of them selling alcohol by retail to members of the public. And your traditional pubs. All of these premises present their own challenges in the way that they operate. Now, our role is to make sure that they are complying with the Licensing Act, and that is our role. So when we are carrying out our day job, when we are looking at applications, we are trying to ensure that they are meeting their objectives, the licensing objectives, and trading well. We move on. Regulated entertainment, vast, that covers a wide range of activities, and there are plenty of images there of different forms of regulated entertainment, from live music, recorded music, cinemas, wrestling, boxing events, indoor sports events, plays, performance of dance. Now, of course, as you can imagine, again, lots of challenges for our officers when dealing with these applications and when having to go out and give advice. Regulated entertainment has a habit, certainly with regards to festivals and nightclubs and pubs, when music's involved, for noise. So having to work closely with premises to ensure that they're not causing antisocial behaviour or noise nuisance to their neighbours or local residents is key. So one of the roles of officers is to go out and give advice on how best to do this. Most premises will have a fair idea. They're applying for a licence. They know their responsibilities. But of course, some don't. And then they are fairly naive when they come into the licensing regime, thinking that everything's going to go swimmingly. Their premises isn't going to be a problem. Well, of course, when you throw into the mix recorded music and live music, and dance and all sorts of different types of regulated entertainment, it has the scope to create problems. And that's where we come in. We often, certainly within Worcestershire, and so our officers deal with a wide range of different types of premises, as I mentioned earlier. So when we're talking about regulated entertainment, we can one day be in a city centre looking at your chains, your all bar ones, your Weatherspoons, looking at those sort of licensed premises. And then on another day, looking at somebody who wants to arrange a festival in a field in the middle of nowhere, which again presents its own challenges. So having to diversify and tailor advice for particular events is always challenging for the members of the team. One of the areas, whether you'll know it or not, is Upton upon Severn. It's a small riverside town in Worcestershire in Great Malvern. They have a number of festivals ranging from jazz festivals to light festivals, water festivals. They have a big music festival called the Sunshine Festival, all of which attract lots of visitors to the area. So we're having to give advice, make sure that events are properly regulated and maintained. We work closely with our environmental health colleagues to ensure that the events meet the environmental health regime, so making sure that health and safety is in place. And again, we talk about antisocial behaviour. It's a bit of a mix between the two, of licensing as one of the licensing objectives and working with environmental health to ensure that they're not causing a nuisance to people in the area. If we move on to the next slide, we have late night refreshment houses, again, all covered under the Licensing Act. So licensing officers will be out of an evening visiting premises such as chip shops, such as pizza parlours, restaurants, takeaways, all of these sort of premises, again, which need a license if they're selling hot food or drink beyond 11. Again, these sort of premises are a magnet. Certainly the takeaway venues in any city or town centre, they can be a magnet for antisocial behaviour. It's where people meet once they've had a drink. They can be hotspots for disorder. So the police look very closely at these areas. So again, it's making sure that these premises understand their responsibilities when applying for a licence. Our officers are often on the phone to these premises giving advice. They are visiting premises, making sure that they are adhering to conditions of licence and not causing problems in our town centres. So that's the Licensing Act. That's one of the areas, a main area of work that our officers look at, from the processing of applications to the giving advice to the enforcement of visiting premises, making sure they're adhering to conditions, or actually looking at illegal or unlicensed activity and taking formal action. If we move on to the next area of work, Stuart, taxi licensing, another big area which takes up a lot of our time. So the licensing office deals with licensed taxi drivers, licensed vehicles and licensed operators. All of the local authorities have a duty to license vehicles, drivers and operators. So within Worcestershire Regulatory Services, we have 6 different licensing regimes for the licensing of taxis, with 6 different sets of policies and fees and applications. But ultimately, why do we license? It's public safety. So what we try to do is focus on the public safety element. There are lots of other things that come into play, but our officers, when dealing with taxis, look at public safety. That is our ultimate goal, making sure that the drivers are right and they're suitable to be issued licenses, and that vehicles are safe whilst in operation. We all know that the general public should have reasonable access to taxis and private hire services. They play a very, very, very important role in the transport infrastructure of our country. At certain times of the day, there is no public transport other than taxis. So we make sure that the taxis that are licensed within our district and under our responsibility meet the necessary standards. If we move on, Stuart. So what do we do? Driver safety. Our role as officers is to ensure that only suitable applicants are issued licenses. The local authorities have their rules and regulations in place, but we deal with the applications. We are the front line. So drivers who want a licence with a particular licensing authority, whether that's Malvern, Worcester, Wychavon, Redditch, Bromsgrove, or Wyre Forest, they will come to us. They will see our officers and they will ask for advice. So what we do, we check, we make sure, we look at their criminal histories. Hopefully they haven't got any, but if they have, we look at those types of convictions that they've been given. We look at driving standards of individuals applying. We look at endorsements, their driving history. Do they have relevant information on their driving licence that we need to look at, that needs to be considered? You know, do they speed? Do they ignore traffic regulations? You know, and if that's the case, then really we don't want to be giving them a licence. So officers are having to speak to applicants and discuss these sometimes very sensitive subjects, certainly around criminal histories. People may have offences from historical, from years and years ago, which they've forgotten about and they've put it behind them. But again, we have to talk about them, discuss them, and see whether they are relevant or whether they will affect an individual applicant's ability to be given a licence. Medical history, so certainly medical fitness is key, making sure that people are medically fit. And we also test people's knowledge of the area. Our officers will sit down with individual applicants and test them on the area in which they want a licence. We expect our taxi drivers, even in this day of sat-navs and electronics, to know their local area. If you get into that vehicle, you would expect them to have a fair idea of the district within which they are licensed to work. Once those people are licensed, it doesn't end there. Our officers often receive information, whether it be from the individual licence holder themselves or from the police, or as part of the renewal application, that new information has come to light, such as convictions. We often have to deal with complaints against drivers. We would like to think that if they are working for operators, that the operators would deal with those complaints and we wouldn't hear from them, but we do. Our role is to safeguard members of the public, and if there is an individual who has been issued with a licence and is acting inappropriately, then our role as officers is to deal with that individual. So we deal with those complaints on a pretty much a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Now, what do we do with those complaints? Well, we investigate them. We look at whether there is any evidence to suggest that an individual is no longer fit and proper. That's the terminology used in legislation. Safe and suitable is what we're moving to in the future. So if there are issues, our officers have the option to refer them to the district council licensing subcommittee. So committees are set up to look at the suitability of individuals. So our officers can be presenting to committees, drafting reports, presenting to committees for individuals that where there are concerns or license reviews have to take place. We move on, Stuart. Vehicle safety, also key. Our officers are out and about. They carry out vehicle inspections. So we have our standards, which we expect the vehicles to meet. But of course, once they're in our operation, we may not see them again for another 12 months. So you'll see from the slides, there we are out and about in car parks, carrying out evening vehicle stop checks with the police, with the DVSA, and also often with HMRC, who are checking for red diesel, making sure that all of the drivers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. This way, members of the public can be satisfied that the vehicles are safe whilst licensed and safe while in operation. It's the least that they can expect when they're paying for a service. So taxi licensing again takes up quite a bit of our time. When you consider we have somewhere in the region of 1,800 licensed drivers within Worcestershire at the various district councils, broken down to the district councils, it's a fair amount of licenses or individuals that we deal with. So it is quite challenging to keep on top of it, but we do very well. If we move on to the next area of licensing, gambling. You may not be aware, but licensing authorities issue licenses for betting premises. In Worcestershire, we have, certainly in Worcester, the Worcester Racecourse. There's a picture of a track and horse racing. Worcester City Council licenses that track to be able to undertake betting at those events. I'll put a picture of casinos. We haven't got any casinos in the area, but they are licensed and they are issued licenses by licensing authorities. Betting shops is another one where we actually issue premises licenses for or to regulate that activity, and also bingo premises. We'll move on. Those are the licenses that I've mentioned. Again, similar to the Licensing Act, officers are having to deal with applications for those premises licenses. Temporary use notices for your point-to-point horse races out in the country. Lots of them in Worcestershire take place. Again, we are there to license them. We move on. Animal licensing, another interesting part. I've put the slides in because it's very topical. We've received updated guidance very recently from DEFRA for our animal licensing premises. So it came in 2018, so it was fairly young bit of legislation, which meant that licenses were required for those activities: selling animals, keeping animals for exhibition, boarding, kenneling, home boarding for dogs and cats, and also dog breeding. So officers are out and about undertaking inspection. So whilst we have the administrative side of dealing with the applications, we're also having to go out and inspect these premises to make sure that they conform to the guidance, that kennels are the right size, that animal welfare is being looked after. Riding establishments is a good example where we go out and we look at the horses, the condition of the horses, how the people are actually undertaking the tuition of riding. You know, is it all being done correctly and in line with the guidance? And that's our role, to make sure that they are. Other areas of animal licensing, if we move on to the next slide, Stuart, are dangerous wild animals. I'm sure you'll be surprised to realise there are pictures there. We have within Worcestershire all of those animals licensed. We had an application for a caiman. Somebody wanted to bring it into the Worcestershire area and look after it. And these are for private collectors. They're not for exhibition. They're to be kept in individuals' homes or on individual premises. Serval cats. There's a place, certainly within Worcestershire, there's a residential house that is somewhere in the region of 30 poisonous snakes. Now, it's our role to ensure that we visit those premises and make sure that suitable control measures are in place so that snakes don't escape into the public. They're entitled to apply for it, but they have to meet certain criteria. There's a picture of a monkey. We haven't got any monkeys, unfortunately, in our area anymore, as our captured monkey in the Wild Forest area passed away a number of years ago, but we have had them in the past. Individuals keeping these animals in their houses. So that's our role, licensing, to go out, make sure that they are suitable environments for these particular animals. Within Worcestershire, we have a number of zoos, more famously the West Midlands Safari Park. Our role is to go out and make sure that they are adhering to their zoo licensing conditions. So officers will visit the safari park and they will go out and check enclosures and they will check animal welfare. There you'll see a picture of myself, look, with a zebra in the bottom left-hand corner. Up at the safari park, looking at the enclosure, making sure that its welfare is being looked after. So it's quite a varied licensing regime when it comes to animals. If we move on, Stuart. Scrap metal's another area of work that we look at. Came in, or rather we were registering premises prior to 2013, but with a spike in metal thefts, government introduced new legislation. It came to the licensing authorities. The licensing officers issue licenses to people who collect scrap metal in their area and also sites that deal in scrap metal. And these sort of licenses that we issue are the ones that probably generate complaints, the ones that we have to deal with, the ones that we have to go out and investigate, whether it be they're unlicensed, reports of unlicensed activity, or whether there are reports of illegal activity taking place on licensed premises. So when we have problems, what do? We move on. So how do we deal with license or problem premises? The motto prevention is better than a cure is true. If those premises know how they should operate before getting a license or before starting, then that's great. That's our role. If we can give that advice to make sure that businesses can trade well, that's what we will do. And that's what we do every day. When the telephone rings, we have a central telephone system which picks up all of those inquiries and passes it to the right people, the people with expertise within the office to offer that advice. When we're dealing with issues that arise at licensed premises and also unlicensed premises, our goal is to give advice. Let's get them compliant with the relevant legislation. We give them written advice, so we will write letters and send them information on what they need to do. If they're not able to comply or if they don't want to comply, we'll give them written warnings. Again, all with a view to getting those businesses or individuals compliant. We'll deal with action plans for licensed premises, but ultimately we can review premises licenses that are issued. You know, the ultimate sanction is taking those licenses off them. You know, reviewing licensed premises, taking enforcement action and then taking the license off them is a big step. It will stop a business from trading, or certainly trading legally. So we like to take that stepped approach. Next slide. How do we achieve this? Partnership working, it's key. I'm sure you've heard lots and lots about partnership working, but we couldn't operate without our partners. West Mercia Police is one of our key partners who we liaise with on a daily basis, whether it's to do with the Licensing Act and alcohol, whether it's to do with taxi drivers, whether it's to do with other sorts of establishments such as scrap metal. We have a scrap metal week of action coming up, and we got planned joint visits to some of our scrap metal sites in the district. So officers will be out and about looking at sites, making sure they are compliant and doing what they're supposed to be doing. We work with other partners such as the fire service and immigration. And again, we undertake joint inspections and visits to premises where we have information that possibly they are non-compliant or trading illegally. Gambling Commissioner down there, again with our gambling responsibilities, we have to work with the Gambling Commission when formulating policy. We move on to the next slide. So what are we trying to do? Obviously, there is a lot of licenses that have been issued. It isn't, you know, we aren't capable of going out and dealing with every complaint. So we now work on an intelligence-led approach. We look at trends of complaints in certain areas. We look at information that's being fed to us from individuals and organisations, and that helps us as officers when planning our daily workload to look at, well, which areas do we need to look at? Which are the important areas that need targeting, that need additional work, or that need additional support? It helps us on an operational basis to support the delivery of the council's licensing function. So the partners rely on us to deliver their functions on their behalf. So that intelligence-led approach is very important, and it helps us put together tactical support. You know, projects in place, enforcement exercise. Now the pictures we showed of taxi drivers having their vehicles checked is led from intelligence. Complaints about vehicles, we will go to particular areas. You know, we will deal with. There's no point turning up in a city if all of the taxis are compliant and in top condition or brand new. It's where we're receiving complaints or information to say that there is wrongdoing. So that is where we're sort of leading to as officers. So when it comes to licensing, there is a broad range of licenses that we issue. Often say that we are dealing with lots and lots of different regulation, lots and lots of different legislation, so we can't be an expert in all of it, but we try our hardest. So hopefully I've given you a brief flying whistle-stop tour of licensing, looking at some of the areas that we actually license in probably a little bit more detail, to give you a bit of a flavour of what we do pretty much on a daily basis. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. That's really interesting, Niall. Thank you. One of the questions I've got, just in case anyone else wants to jump in, you're saying about with the taxi licensing, does that cover taxi drivers like Uber and things like that, or are they outside the scope of taxi licensing?
No, yeah, it covers all taxi licensing. So Uber, again, are a private hire operator. They need an operator's license. You will have heard lots of reports in London of their operator's license being taken off them by the Mayor of London and the Department of Transport looking into them. Well, they have licenses in lots of different authorities. They haven't got one in Worcestershire yet, although we have spoken to them in the past. They haven't as yet felt the need to come into the Worcestershire area and offer their services, but I'm sure that I think they were focusing on their responsibilities, or certainly the London element. And once they've got that right, they'll probably go back into expansion. But yes, that's exactly what we do. We issue licenses to those taxi operators to allow those vehicles to operate in our districts.
Right, it's been really good. I can't see any questions in the chat. If anyone's got anything before we finish for today, please shout out, put your hand up.
Thank you, Stuart. Well, I have put my details at the end of the slides. So if anybody wants to contact me directly, or if you just want to contact Worcestershire Regulatory Services, the general telephone number is there and the email address. There I am, Luck.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Neil. It's been very interesting. Hopefully people that see this now and see a recording later will find it just as interesting, and you know, realise that you're there as a regulator that covers a lot of the premises other regulators will visit, and for colleagues from the Growth Hub actually having that awareness of the licence requirements so they can signpost businesses effectively. Yeah,
thank you, Stuart. I hope that list at the beginning of all of the areas we cover is useful, certainly to the Growth Hubs, because they can see the different areas and the vast array of things that need a licence.
And as you've shown, we're all just very approachable people in regulation. So find your local licensing officers and say hello. Right, thank you very much. I think we can stop.
Thanks, Stuart. Thank you, everyone.